especially with things like dyspraxia, dyslexia, ADHD, there's this common stigma kind of about them where because you can't physically see the problem that a child might have, you automatically believe that it's fake, it's an attention seeking tactic, it's just them not wanting to do the task, it's like you've said, being called lazy, just that you're disruptive on purpose, especially if your ADHD manifests in more of the hyperactive symptoms, then you're just being a distraction, you're not respectful, and that kind of thing. When a child literally has that, they have pretty much no control over these things, and it's just part of who they are. If someone had a broken leg, no one would come over to them and be like, "Oh, you're just seeking attention. That's why you don't want to do PE." Like, it doesn't correlate with anything else. But because of like lack of education, there's so much ignorance surrounding these things. Then a lot of people then just have this idea, especially actually, I think with ADHD, because I know that growing up, I always felt like, oh, even just based on what adults said around me, that ADHD was something that didn't exist. The same way your teacher said it was a thing of, oh, parents that can't discipline their children. And like discipline is such a big thing in Nigeria, where you'll find that it's more common than not for parents to hit their children and that kind of thing. And like home training is a really important factor in Nigeria, especially in certain regions. So if your child happened to have this, they would just go through so much abuse at school, at home, with friends, with other distant relatives, just because they can't behave, whereas they have ADHD, for example. Or the child comes home and he never does his homework because he has dyslexia, or he makes a lot of mistakes, and then he gets beaten at home. But it actually just turns out that he needs help to figure out how to read and or write or spell. And if he got the proper support, he would be doing fine. But a lot of people have no idea about these things in Nigeria. Like, no idea. In their minds, the child just wants to make their life a living hell. And a lot of the time, this abuse will start at home before it even like gets to school. You will have parents that are abusing their children physically, verbally, just because of something that is out of their control. And that's why I'm so impressed by the fact that you have over 700 schools, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, over 700 schools, and 500,000 students currently are getting the education that is necessary to combat this stigma, combat all these misconceptions about them. But I wanted you to talk a bit more about your autism, because I feel like, again, that is something that a lot of people don't know about. And when were you diagnosed with autism?
Yeah, so I was diagnosed when I was 12. And I talked to different people who have different viewpoints on that. There are a lot of individuals who are diagnosed when they're 3, 4 years old. And so they've known that they're autistic for as long as they can remember. And then there are a lot of people, especially women, who get diagnosed much later in life. I've heard stories from women who had a child and then they realized that their child might have a few communication issues, and so they get their child diagnosed, and when they find out that their child's autistic, they read up about it and learn more about autism, and in the process realize that they themselves are autistic. And that's very common in women because women present differently with autism. So I can be this. I had problems that I would encounter because of autism. For example, I would often get distressed at certain fabrics and certain items of clothing. Because with autism, it comes with a sensory processing disorder, which means you can either be more sensitive to sounds and touch and smells, or you can be less sensitive. And so for me, I have hypersensitivity, which means I'm more sensitive. Mm-hmm. And so it's the kind of thing where when I'm really stressed, and when stress can often make your sensory processing disorder heightened. So when I have a lot of anxiety, I can feel my heartbeat and I can hear the electricity in the wall. And so I become very, very, very sensitive. And when you're in that zone, you can feel fabrics to a different level, and it's something that can cause so much anxiety. Just a scratchy cardigan can like leave me crying on the floor, and that happened a lot when I was younger. And I remember I would go into school and I would get shouted at for it. Teachers would say, "You have to wear your cardigan," and they would say, "You're a diva, you're a drama queen, you're making a big scene over nothing, you're crying over a cardigan, that's so ridiculous." And I would just get called all these names. And it got to a point where I decided, you know what, I'm just going to have to suffer in silence because I don't want to get called a drama queen. And so I just sit in the corner and just cry as quietly as I could over how scratchy this cardigan is, which sounds really petty. But for me, when you have a sensory processing disorder and everything is 3-4 times more sensitive, it really hurts. And so I had to just go through that. And then eventually it got to a point where I could wear really uncomfortable clothes and I could be really distressed, but I knew how to keep it all hidden. And so I could have a conversation with somebody while being on the verge of having a panic attack and then think, oh, she's fine. I remember a lot of autistic individuals struggle with eye contact. And I went to a school where every morning, as you enter the building, you have to look the headmistress in the eye and shake her hand. And everyone had to do it. And because I struggled with eye contact, I found it very difficult. And I struggled with eye contact among anybody, but especially a senior person, as somebody in a senior position like the headmistress. It gave me anxiety just kind of being around her. But to have to look her in the eye, it was very stressful. So every morning she would berate me and she would tell me in front of all the parents who were dropping their kids off and all the kids who were trying to come into the school, Siena, you have to look me in the eye. It's so rude to not look me in the eye. And I would have to do it. And I remember afterwards, I would just have so much anxiety. And I remember going to school, I was stressed out about it. And I remember she would make me hold her hand really tight, to shake her hand, which was stressful because I don't like people touching me because I have a sensory processing disorder. And the combination of the two, it was really difficult. But 2 months later, I managed to do it. And I managed to figure it out. I still had the exact same amount of anxiety, but from the outside, nobody could tell. And so I figured out how to mask from a very young age. And by masking, I mean be autistic, but pretend to be neurotypical. And so I would script conversations that I would have with people. I would stand in the mirror and teach myself facial expressions and teach myself how to talk in a way that wasn't monotone, because naturally I'm very monotone. I don't really have like inflections in my voice and I don't really have a tone of voice. If I'm angry, my voice stays the same as if I'm happy. And so I taught myself how to change my voice for context. And I taught myself, how to read body language and all of that. And it took hours. It took dedication and it took like a lot of training. And I remember I would go online and I would watch these videos that were designed for people who were coming from a different culture and needed to learn about Western culture and how, people here do high fives and how people here shake hands and stuff like that. And I would watch those videos so I could learn just common stuff. And I could have a video that dissects how to shake someone's hand or a video that dissects how to greet somebody. And I would teach myself how to be neurotypical. And then I got so good at it that people thought I was neurotypical. But at the time, when I was pretending to be neurotypical, I didn't know I was autistic. I just knew I was different. And had no idea that I was autistic because I didn't present in the way that they expected me to. With people often hear about Rain Man and the Sheldon, the guy from The Big Bang Theory. And that's the image that comes to mind. Sorry. That's the image that comes to mind when they think of autism. And I wasn't presenting that way. And I think I would naturally, but I just trained myself to hide that part. And so it meant that people thought I was neurotypical. People would think I was a weird neurotypical. Like they would say, there's something off about her. She's a bit odd. She's a bit quirky, and they would use words like that, but I wasn't diagnosed. And eventually, what happened was I couldn't hide my sensory processing disorder. Everyone who knew me knew that I had. They may not have known the term for it, sensory processing disorder, but they knew that I was very sensitive to lights and sounds and smells, and that I would get kind of stressed out about them. And my mom knew more than anybody. And it got to a point where I got so much anxiety from masking and just from life in general, from being bullied, that my sensory processing disorder got to the point where I couldn't leave the house because everything was just too loud and I'd have a panic attack. And so my mom knew at that point that something was wrong, that this is not kind of normal. And so she got me diagnosed with a sensory processing disorder. And after I was diagnosed, the person who diagnosed me said, you know, she needs to go see a pain management specialist because she's in so much pain all the time and it's a real problem if she can't leave the house. And you know, I couldn't sleep through the night because it hurt to make contact with, you know, the bed. And I couldn't, like, it was constant pain that I was in because of my sensory processing disorder. And I couldn't be around people. I couldn't be around my dogs. And I had to just live life with the lights out because I couldn't have bright lights that would distress me. And so they were like, you need to get help for this. And so I went to see a pain management specialist. And while I was there, she told me, you know, that normally, like, for things to get this bad, you have to have some anxiety. Do you have any anxiety? And I told her about how I was being bullied. And then she said, well, if people are bullying you for being, you know, different and weird, and then you're also having this sensory processing disorder, have you considered the fact that you could be autistic? Because you have to have a sensory processing disorder to be autistic, so you tick that box. Mm-hmm. And you're a bit different. And that was how I got diagnosed. And I was 12 at the time, which I personally think was late. You know, I'm very grateful that I got diagnosed at 12 and not 40, like some people do. But I had a lot of mental health problems because I spent my life masking and I would pretend to be neurotypical. But instead of thinking, okay, I'm just going to do this because, you know, I have autism and I'm different and this is going to improve my life, instead I was thinking, what is wrong with me? Other people don't have to sit here and script conversations. Other people don't have to teach themselves how to have facial expressions. And they don't have to teach themselves like how to smile and how to laugh and how to not be monotone. That just comes naturally. That's a skill that they're born with. Why am I here having to teach myself? And I had all these questions and I was really confused about why I was like this. But at the same time, I didn't want to tell anybody because I didn't want people to think that there was something seriously wrong with me, because it doesn't sound very normal to be like, I was just born not being able to communicate normally. And I have all this anxiety about pretty much everything and interaction. And so when I found out that I was autistic and I found a community of people who were experiencing the exact same problems, I no longer felt so isolated and alone. I felt like there were people who could understand me. And that was something that really helped my mental health and my self-esteem and my life in general. I feel, you know, really sad for people who get diagnosed when they're 40 and they spend, you know, the majority of their life just wondering why they're different. And without knowing that they're not alone and there are a lot of people like them. Like, that must be a really isolating and difficult experience to go through. And so I think it's really important for people to get diagnosed early.
Yeah, and I feel like, you know, your website will then be doing such a huge part in terms of educating people and allowing people to realize that, you know, there are many people who are like you, and provide, you know, that kind of support and give a kind of community, so that you don't feel like you're going through it alone. Could you tell us a bit more about your website?
Yeah, and that's where I wrote my book. Oh, that was where I was going to mention that was where I wrote my book. I have my book, The Spectrum Girls Survival Guide, How to Grow Up Awesome and Autistic.
Wow.
And I wrote that just to give resources, and it's for girls with autism. Mm-hmm. That's why, just to create a kind of community and to talk about these issues.
And where tips and tricks available, because I feel like it would come in very handy, especially to a lot of women who may feel like they're different but not know what exactly it is that's behind this difference.
So you can buy the book from my website, www.sienacastellon.com. You can also buy it from Amazon or Waterstones. Lots of different people carry my book now. I'm really happy about that.
It's amazing. That's really amazing. And I feel like, a lot of people may have gone through the same difficulties that you have, but rather than, do something about it and, try and create these safe spaces for other women. It is so easy to just, focus on yourself, and that is fair. But like, I think it's really impressive how you have managed to write a book and have a website and be advocating for so many people who are like you and might not even know that they are. I wanted to say that how do you feel? Do you feel that, because obviously I don't feel like schools are equipped to help students that have learning disabilities. And what do you think, or how do you feel like this can be combated? How do you feel like what do you think should be implemented into school curriculums and that kind of thing to help?
Yeah, I think that teachers need to be better educated, and they need to understand, the consequences of their actions. And this comes with anything. It doesn't just come with learning differences. I feel like teachers in general should never feel like it's okay to call someone stupid. Like, that's really hurtful. And they should never feel like it's okay to just accuse people of being lazy,
Mhm.
and to just definitively be like, she's a lazy person, that's the end of the issue. Instead of being like, there's a problem here, let's try to solve it. And I've had quite a few teachers who weren't educated about learning differences. Teachers who didn't really understand what autism was, or truly understand, the minutiae of like dyslexia and dyspraxia. But they were happy to support me. They were just kind people who were like, okay, you're telling me that you need help and that this is how I can support you, so I'll support you. And in the UK, you can make reasonable adjustments, and you have to if someone has a disability. And a reasonable adjustment can be anything from, oh, I want to sit near the front of the class because I have poor eyesight, to, I need you to help me write out my homework after class because I struggle with organization because I'm dyspraxic, and it would be good if you could just help me make sure I understand my homework and my assignment. Anything like that. And I would frequently ask teachers for very reasonable adjustments.
Mhm.
For instance, I asked one teacher, I'm sitting in a place where I'm seeing the board from this weird angle, and because I'm at an angle, it's hard to read. And because I have dyslexia, I struggle to read things that are, distorted. And she told me, no, I'm not going to move you because, I'm going to have to change the whole seating plan. I can't just move you. I have to move everybody if I'm going to move you. And that's too much effort. So I'm just going to leave you where you are. And I sent her a follow-up email saying, I cannot read from the board. So anything you write on the board, I have no idea what's going on because I can't read it. And she responded with, okay, not my problem. You deal with it. And it was really upsetting for me because now I'm in a situation where, I'm not getting this adjustment that is very simple for the teacher to make, but could have such an impact on my experience. 3 seats over is something that takes, a minute. You just walk into class, say, Siena, can you just sit there? And you swap with her. And then all of a sudden, I can understand what's going on. But the way that she, said things, I wasn't able to do that. And so I spent the whole class not knowing what's going on and not knowing what she's writing on the board. And she was drawing diagrams on the board. I don't know what's happening with the diagrams. And it was so inaccessible. And I feel like that is just an element of not caring.
Yeah.
And it's not like, oh, well, I don't understand what dyslexia is. So I don't understand that you struggle to read things that are like distorted and from a weird angle. It was just, I don't care.
Yeah.
And I feel like there have to be consequences for that. If I were a head teacher, I would be very strict on teachers who are effectively discriminating against their students, because legally you are required to make reasonable adjustments, and if you don't, that is illegal.
Yeah.
And so I feel like the biggest tip I would give is to just be kind and considerate towards people. And if people ask for an adjustment that's reasonable, like it would be one thing if I were like, oh, I want to, I'm trying to think of an example of something that's very unreasonable.
I've been trying to think of unreasonable adjustments, and everything that comes to mind, I'm like, that really isn't that unreasonable. Like, I feel like teachers just have this idea that any student that is slightly disruptive, it just wants to ruin their whole class. And I think that is such a negative way to look at things, because in the end, you prevent so many students from learning just because you think that they're being disrespectful. But in reality, they're literally trying to learn. So I think, yeah, it's very important that teachers first and foremost are considerate and kind, and understanding, because in that way, I feel like that will just automatically lead on to them getting rid of that ignorance. Because if I feel like, all right, a student has come to me and they've asked to be moved because from this angle it's difficult to read, I move them, and then the first thing that's going to come to my mind is, oh, I wonder why it's difficult for them to read from this angle when I haven't had any other students have this. Google. I go on, I discover that, oh, all right, this student might be dyslexic. And the reason why I think it's so much more important for teachers to have this kind of training is because a lot of the time parents won't see their children in the school environment. And if you have a learning disability, your teacher is meant to be the first person to spot and help get you diagnosed. So it's so important that this ignorance is erased as much as possible, because so many students are being told that they're just, lazy, attention seeking, and whatnot, whereas they just have differences in the way that they compute things. Um, and yeah, so I was wondering about your campaign. Is it just UK based, or are you on a more global scale?
Now I've got schools signed up from Dubai, Australia, the United States, and kind of everywhere. It's a global campaign.
And you'd be, do schools have to reach out to you, or do you do the reaching out? Because I think it would be interesting to get you involved in a number of schools in Nigeria, because we have this problem.
Yeah, so it happens in numerous ways. So sometimes I'll have somebody who will contact me and say, I want my school to sign up for this. This would be a good thing for my school to do. And so they will give me the contact details of somebody at their school, and I will reach out to the school that way.
Mm-hmm.
And other times I just have schools hearing about it and then signing up through my website.
Okay. And could you remind us of what the website is?
www.neurodiversity-celebration-week.com.
Perfect. Is there anything you believe, we've missed on, or you'd like to mention or like to highlight, that we haven't spoken about yet?
I'd just like to talk. I mentioned it when about like how teachers can. It's just very important to be kind, just in general. I feel like a lot of the problems that I have, being autistic and dyslexic, dyspraxic, ADHD, the problems come from people having misunderstandings and stigma and mistreating me because of those beliefs. And if you're just kind and considerate and have an open mind, you'll make the world a better place. And not just for neurodivergent people, just people in general. And another thing is, just realizing that some things that you say can be incredibly hurtful. So I've had people tell me, ADHD doesn't exist. I've had people tell me everybody is a little bit autistic, and then give an example of how somebody made some like social mistake and how that means that they're a little bit autistic, which is wrong. And it's hurtful when you're trying to ask for a reasonable adjustment or ask for help for something, and someone tells you, well, you're autistic, but everybody is, so you're not really different.
Yeah.
Like, well, you know, having a bit of a social blunder is not the same as me not being able to read body language and constantly confusing social situations and having incredible anxiety and most of the time being able to feel my own heartbeat and having anxiety and not being able to leave the house sometimes. It's not the same thing. And so, you know, just educating yourself a little bit if you're going to speak out and talk about neurodiversity and share opinions about neurodiversity. Yeah, so that's what I would urge people to do.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Again, I am incredibly impressed by what you have achieved so far. And looking forward to, I'd like to actually get my old school in Nigeria involved with your initiative. So I'm going to reach out to them and see if they're interested and would sign up on your website. But I hope that through this, a lot of people learn more about neurodivergence and just have more compassion, basically. So thank you so much for joining us. And I hope that everyone watching this follows our initiative on Instagram on Initiative AED for general updates. And for all things like community sessions, we also have the account at IAED_CS. So thank you again, Siena, and I hope you have an amazing day.
Thank you. It was really great to talk to you.
Me too.